In August 1971, a U.S. president walked into the Oval Office and, with a single televised announcement, broke a promise that had held the global economy together for nearly 3 decades. Within hours, the price of gold exploded, central banks panicked, and the financial world, as people knew it, simply ended. But here's what almost nobody asks. Why did he do it? What was he really running from? And why, more than 50 years later, are governments still terrified of the very metals they once based their entire monetary systems on? To understand why gold and silver became enemies of the state, you need to go back to 1944. World War II is ending. Representatives from 44 nations gather in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, with one mission: rebuild the shattered global economy. The solution they create is elegant. The US dollar becomes the world's reserve currency, and every dollar is backed by gold at a fixed rate, $35 per ounce. Other currencies peg themselves to the dollar. It's a pyramid with gold at the foundation and the dollar as the intermediary. For the system to work, the US promises something critical. Any nation can exchange their dollars for physical gold anytime they want. This is the Bretton Woods system. And for 2 decades, it works beautifully. Global trade flourishes, economies rebuild, the dollar becomes synonymous with stability. But there's a problem brewing beneath the surface, a mathematical impossibility that nobody wants to acknowledge. And by the late 1960s, that problem is about to explode. The flaw in Bretton Woods is simple but fatal. The U.S. government starts spending more than it has. The Vietnam War costs billions. President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs, Medicare, Medicaid, urban development, cost billions more. The U.S. is fighting a war on poverty at home and a shooting war abroad, simultaneously. To pay for it all, they do what governments always do. They print money. But remember the promise. Every dollar is supposed to be backed by gold. As more dollars flood into circulation, foreign governments start doing the math. France, under President Charles de Gaulle, is the first to sound the alarm. In 1965, de Gaulle's economic advisor, Jacques Rueff, calculates something disturbing. There are far more dollars circulating globally than there is gold in Fort Knox to back them. De Gaulle makes a bold move. He begins converting France's dollar reserves into physical gold and literally shipping it across the Atlantic. Other nations watch carefully. If France is worried, maybe they should be too. The gold drain begins. By 1971, the math has become undeniable. The U.S. holds roughly 100 tons of gold. But foreign governments hold claims on more than 3 times that amount in dollars. If even a fraction of countries demand their gold simultaneously, the system collapses. President Richard Nixon faces an impossible choice. He can honor the gold conversion promise and watch Fort Knox empty, destroying America's monetary power. Or he can break the promise and face international outrage. But there's a deeper issue that historians often miss. Gold and silver have a unique property. They can't be printed. They can't be inflated away. They impose discipline. When your currency is tied to a fixed amount of metal, you can't simply create money to solve your problems. You have to balance your books. For a government drowning in debt and ambitious spending programs, this discipline is intolerable. Gold isn't just a metal, it's a constraint. It's a check on power. And by 1971, that check is about to be eliminated. August 15th, 1971. Nixon appears on national television for what he calls an important announcement on the economy. He announces that the U.S. is temporarily suspending the convertibility of dollars into gold. The word temporarily is important. It suggests this is a short-term emergency measure. More than 50 years later, that suspension has never been lifted. What Nixon doesn't say in that speech is more revealing than what he does. He doesn't explain that the gold reserves are nearly depleted. He doesn't mention that the spending programs of the 1960s have created an impossible debt burden. He frames it as protecting America from international speculators. Within days, gold prices surge. The carefully constructed Bretton Woods system disintegrates. And for the first time in modern history, the world's reserve currency is backed by nothing but trust in the government that issues it. This is the moment when gold and silver transform from the foundation of money into enemies of the state. Because now, their very existence poses a question that governments don't want asked. If money isn't backed by anything tangible, what prevents its infinite creation? The aftermath of the Nixon shock reveals a pattern that repeats throughout history. When money becomes untethered from physical constraints, governments inevitably abuse that freedom. The 1970s see unprecedented inflation. The consumer price index rises by more than 100% during the decade. Meanwhile, gold rises from $35 an ounce to over $800 by 1980. Silver rises from $1.50 to over $50. The metals are sending a message. Paper currency is losing purchasing power at an alarming rate. Governments respond with a coordinated campaign to suppress precious metals prices and promote paper assets. Central banks sell gold reserves. Financial media portrays gold investors as paranoid doomsayers. The message is clear: Modern economies have evolved beyond primitive metals, but the debt continues growing. Because that's the secret that gold exposes. When currency is debt-based and unrestrained, the only path forward is more debt forever. Every few decades, the pattern repeats. A financial crisis emerges from excessive debt creation. Governments respond by creating more money to solve the crisis. Precious metals. Prices surge as investors lose faith in paper currencies. Then authorities intervene to suppress metals prices and restore confidence in the paper system. 2008, the financial crisis. Global debt nearly doubles as central banks print trillions. Gold rises from $800 to over $1,900 by 2011. 2020, the pandemic. Governments worldwide create more money in 2 years than in the previous 2 decades combined. Gold hits all-time highs above $2,000. 2024, global debt now exceeds $315 trillion, more than 3 times global GDP. The debt-to-GDP ratio in advanced economies averages 120%, levels historically associated with financial collapse. Meanwhile, central banks are quietly reversing decades of gold sales. China, Russia, India, Poland, and others are accumulating gold reserves at the fastest pace since 1967. They're not buying because gold is primitive. They're buying because they understand what history teaches. When debt reaches unsustainable levels, the metals that impose discipline become valuable precisely because governments can't control them. Look at what's happening today with fresh eyes. The U.S. national debt exceeds $36 trillion and grows by roughly $1 trillion every 100 days. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet expanded from $800 billion in 2007 to over $8 trillion today. Every major central bank is engaged in quantitative easing, a euphemism for money printing. This is why gold and silver remain enemies of the debt system. They represent an alternative, a measurement tool that reveals the devaluation happening in plain sight. When an ounce of gold bought a fine suit in 1920, and still buys a fine suit today, but the dollar price has gone from $20 to $2,000. What's really changed value? 3 critical lessons emerge from this story. First, gold and silver aren't investments in the traditional sense. They're insurance against monetary mismanagement. They hold purchasing power precisely because governments can't create them. Second, the conflict between precious metals and debt-based systems is structural, not ideological. Any system built on infinite debt expansion will inevitably treat finite, disciplined assets as threats. Third, history shows that the suppression of gold and silver prices never lasts. Every attempt to minimize their importance eventually fails when debt reaches breaking points. So here's the uncomfortable question we're left with. If the current system requires over $300 trillion in global debt to function, and that debt grows faster than the economy every year, what happens when the mathematics finally become impossible? Central banks are preparing for that answer. They're accumulating gold while telling citizens it's irrelevant. The smart money is reading between the lines. The Nixon shock wasn't the end of gold's role in the monetary system. It was just the beginning of a longer game, one where the relationship between metals and money would be hidden but never truly severed. If this video changed how you think about money and the role of precious metals in the global economy, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the financial systems that shape our world. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Do you think the current debt system is sustainable, or are we heading toward another monetary reset? The metals are still watching. The question is, are you?